November 2024. The Carnival Horizon cruise ship arrives in Miami. FBI agents board. Passengers are interviewed. A young woman named Anna Kepner has been found deceased in her cabin. The medical examiner will rule it a homicide. Federal investigators focus on her stepbrother as the primary subject of their investigation. But there's something else about this case. Something that raises questions about what happened in the hours immediately after Anna's death. Her biological father, Thomas Hudson, wasn't notified for 32 hours. 32 hours after his daughter was found deceased on that ship, he still knew nothing. The FBI had been called. The ship was held at port. Passengers were being questioned. Evidence was being collected. And for 32 hours, Anna's father had no idea his daughter was gone. This isn't a detail that investigators overlook. In death investigations, especially those involving potential homicide, notification protocols matter. They matter for legal reasons. They matter for investigative reasons. And they matter because families have rights. So why the delay? Was it procedural? Was it logistical? Or, according to Thomas Hudson's own testimony in court, was someone controlling who knew what and when they knew it? This is the Anna Kepner case, and this is the story of 32 hours that changed everything about how this family's tragedy unfolded. To understand why a 32-hour notification delay matters, we need to understand how death notifications typically work in cases like this. When someone dies on a cruise ship in international or U.S. waters, multiple jurisdictions become involved. The ship's crew discovers the death and notifies the captain. The captain contacts the ship's security and medical personnel. Depending on the location and circumstances, the FBI, Coast Guard, or local authorities are notified. If the death appears suspicious or criminal, it's treated as a crime scene immediately. The ship is held at the next port. Federal agents board. And critically, next of kin are notified as soon as their identity and contact information are confirmed. This process usually happens within hours, not days. Why? Because families have legal rights to be notified when their loved ones die. Because timely notification allows families to make decisions about remains, about funeral arrangements, about traveling to where their loved one died. And in criminal investigations, early notification ensures that family members can be properly interviewed, that their movements and communications can be documented, and that they're not excluded from the investigative process. Delayed notification raises questions. It raises questions about why. It raises questions about who made the decision to delay. And it raises questions about whether that delay served an investigative purpose or whether it served someone else's interests. According to testimony given by Thomas Hudson in the custody hearing held weeks after Anna's death, he learned about what happened to his daughter more than a day after she was found. 32 hours. He testified that he did not receive notification from the FBI. He did not receive notification from the cruise line. He did not receive notification from Hampton Police or any other law enforcement agency. According to his testimony, the call finally came from Chantel Kepner, Anna's mother and Thomas's ex-wife. 32 hours after Anna had been discovered deceased in her cabin, Chantel called Thomas to tell him their daughter was gone. Now, let's establish some critical facts about Thomas Hudson's legal relationship to Anna. According to court documents, Thomas and Chantel were married for nearly 15 years. They had 3 children together during that marriage. When they divorced in 2022, a parenting plan was put in place. That plan established custody arrangements, visitation schedules, and legal rights for both parents. Thomas was Anna's stepfather, having helped raise her from a young age. While Anna was biologically Christopher Kepner's daughter, Thomas had been a parental figure in her life for years. According to court filings, Thomas maintained regular contact with Anna and considered her part of his family. His contact information was readily available. He was listed in court documents. He had an established relationship with the family. There was no legal reason he couldn't be notified promptly. So what happened during those 32 hours? Let's construct the timeline as best we can from available information. On a Saturday morning in November, the Carnival Horizon docked in Miami. According to news reports, FBI agents boarded the ship as passengers were disembarking. Anna's body was brought out on a stretcher and transported from the port. This happened in the morning hours, visible to media and other passengers. The FBI immediately began processing the cabin as a crime scene. They interviewed the stepbrother, who according to reports was the last person seen with Anna. They interviewed Anna's mother, Chantel. They interviewed her stepfather, Christopher Kepner. They interviewed other passengers who might have seen or heard something. The medical examiner was brought in to examine the body and determine cause of death. According to official statements, the cause was determined to be asphyxiation, and the manner was ruled homicide. All of this happened on Saturday. The FBI was actively investigating. The family members who were on the cruise, Chantel, Christopher, and the stepbrother, were all being interviewed and providing statements. They knew what had happened. They knew Anna was deceased. They knew it was being investigated as a homicide. But according to Thomas Hudson's testimony, he knew nothing. Not Saturday morning when the ship docked. Not Saturday afternoon when the FBI was interviewing witnesses. Not Saturday evening when the medical examiner was conducting the autopsy. Not Sunday morning, more than 24 hours after Anna was found. According to Thomas's testimony in court, he finally received a phone call on Sunday. The call came from Chantel, and that's when he learned that Anna, a young woman he had helped raise, was dead. 32 hours after she was discovered. 32 hours after federal investigators had begun their work. 32 hours after everyone else in the immediate family knew what had happened. Thomas testified about this delay in the custody hearing. His attorney argued that this delay was part of a pattern of controlling information and excluding Thomas from important matters involving the children. The delay, according to Thomas's legal team, wasn't accidental. It was calculated. It was an attempt to control the narrative about what happened before Thomas could hear it from investigators or from Anna directly. Now, we have to be very careful here about what we can and cannot know for certain. We don't have access to FBI communications logs. We don't know exactly when the FBI confirmed Thomas's identity and contact information. We don't know what internal protocols they followed or what decisions they made about notifications. It's possible there were legitimate investigative or logistical reasons for the delay. Perhaps the FBI was focused on interviewing those who were present on the ship first. Perhaps they were working to secure the crime scene and collect evidence before expanding notifications. Perhaps there was confusion about Thomas's legal relationship to Anna, given that she was not his biological child. But Thomas's attorney raised a compelling question in court. If confusion about legal relationships or contact information was the issue, why didn't Chantel or Christopher provide Thomas's information to investigators immediately? They had his contact information. They knew he would want to know. They knew he had been a parental figure in Anna's life. According to Thomas's testimony, they made a conscious choice not to contact him, not to provide his information to authorities, and to wait more than a day before making that notification themselves. And that choice, according to Thomas, wasn't about logistics or protocols. It was about control. Let's consider what can happen during a 32-hour delay in a death investigation. In those crucial first hours after a death is discovered, investigators are gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and establishing timelines. Witness memories are freshest immediately after an event. Details that might be critical can be forgotten or confused as time passes. Physical evidence must be preserved quickly before it degrades or is contaminated. And critically, investigators want to interview everyone separately, before witnesses have time to discuss the case with each other, before stories can be coordinated, before narratives can be aligned. When someone is excluded from those initial hours, when they're not notified until more than a day later, they're at a disadvantage. They can't provide their own account of events in those critical early hours. They can't ask questions about what they're being told. They can't request to see evidence or speak with investigators while memories are fresh. They're receiving information secondhand, often from the very people who were present when the death occurred. And that creates an inherent imbalance in how information flows and how the story is initially constructed. According to testimony in the custody hearing, Thomas had been systematically excluded from information about his children for months before Anna's death. His attorney presented evidence that since January 2024, when Chantel began her relationship with Christopher Kepner, Thomas's access to the children had been progressively restricted. Phone calls went unreturned. Text messages through the court-mandated parenting app were ignored. Scheduled visitations were denied, with Chantel claiming the children didn't want to see their father. Thomas's attorney argued that this pattern of exclusion reached its peak with the 32-hour notification delay. Even in death, they argued, Thomas was being kept from his daughter. Chantel's attorney presented a different narrative. They argued that Thomas himself had been withholding access, that after Andrew returned to live with Thomas in April 2024, Andrew wasn't allowed to see his mother. They argued that both parents had made mistakes, that both had violated the parenting agreement at various times. They suggested that any delay in notification might have been due to the chaos and trauma of the situation, not malicious intent. They argued that Chantel was devastated by Anna's death and may not have been thinking clearly about notification protocols or Thomas's need to know. But here's what makes the 32-hour delay particularly significant in the context of this case. According to the FBI investigation and evidence presented in court, Anna's death occurred in the cabin she was sharing with her stepbrother. The stepbrother was the primary focus of the investigation. No one else has been publicly identified as a subject or suspect. The investigation centered on what happened in that cabin, when it happened, and who was responsible. And the two adults who made the decision to place Anna in a shared cabin with her stepbrother, the two adults who were responsible for supervision and safety on that cruise, were Chantel and Christopher. According to testimony from Anna's ex-boyfriend, he had raised concerns about the stepbrother's behavior before the cruise. He had warned Chantel and Christopher. The specifics of those warnings haven't been made fully public, but the fact that warnings were given is documented. Despite those warnings, Anna and her stepbrother were placed in a shared cabin. And when Anna was found deceased in that cabin, the two adults who made that decision had 32 hours to speak with investigators, to provide their accounts, to establish their narrative about supervision and safety, before Anna's father even knew what had happened. Thomas's attorney argued in court that this delay allowed Chantel and Christopher to control the initial story. They could tell investigators about cabin arrangements, about supervision, about why decisions were made, all without Thomas being able to ask questions or provide alternative context. They could frame the narrative about family dynamics, about Anna's relationship with her stepbrother, about whether concerns had been raised, all before Thomas could speak with investigators himself. And critically, they had time to discuss with each other what they would say, how they would explain their decisions, and how they would respond to inevitable questions about whether this tragedy could have been prevented. Now, we must emphasize, there is no evidence that Chantel or Christopher have been charged with any crime related to Anna's death. The FBI investigation has focused on the stepbrother. There's been no public indication that investigators believe the parents are criminally responsible for what happened in that cabin. But Thomas's legal team has argued in civil court that the parents bear moral responsibility for the decisions that placed Anna in that situation. And they've argued that the 32-hour delay was part of a pattern of excluding Thomas from information and decisions that affected his children's safety. Let's compare this case to standard protocols in similar situations. When a minor or young adult dies under suspicious circumstances, especially in cases involving other family members, law enforcement typically tries to notify all parents or legal guardians as quickly as possible. Why? Because those parents may have critical information. They may know about prior incidents, concerns, or warning signs. They may have observed behaviors or dynamics that investigators need to understand. And importantly, they have a right to be involved in decisions about their child's remains, about autopsies if needed, and about funeral arrangements. In cases where parents are divorced or separated, both parents are typically notified unless there's a specific legal reason not to, such as a restraining order or custody restriction. The fact that Anna was technically Christopher's biological daughter, not Thomas's, shouldn't have prevented notification. Thomas had been married to Anna's mother for 15 years. He had helped raise Anna. He had a legal relationship with the family through the custody agreement for his biological children. He was easily locatable. There was no legal barrier to notifying him. So what explains the delay? One possibility is simple oversight. In the chaos of a death investigation, especially one involving multiple jurisdictions and a cruise ship, maybe Thomas's name simply wasn't mentioned by the family members being interviewed. Maybe investigators asked who should be notified, and Chantel only mentioned her immediate family. Maybe there was confusion about Thomas's relationship to Anna, and investigators didn't realize he should be contacted. This is the most charitable interpretation. It assumes no malicious intent, just a tragic oversight in a traumatic situation. But Thomas's testimony suggests a different explanation. He testified that this delay was consistent with months of being excluded from information about his children. He testified that Chantel had been systematically cutting off his communication with the children, denying him access and controlling what information he received about their lives. He testified that even in the midst of this tragedy, that pattern continued. That even when his daughter was dead, he was still being kept in the dark. There's another aspect of this 32-hour delay that's worth examining. During those hours, how was information about Anna's death being communicated to others? Were other family members notified? Were friends told? Was Anna's school contacted? According to news reports, Anna attended Temple Christian School in Titusville. The school confirmed she was a student there and released a statement about her death. Did the school know before Thomas did? Did extended family members know? Did friends from the cruise know? At what point did the information begin spreading to Anna's broader community? And where was Thomas in that sequence? These questions matter because they speak to whether Thomas was specifically excluded or whether notification was simply delayed for everyone outside the immediate family on the cruise. If Thomas was the last to know, if everyone else in Anna's life learned about her death before he did, that suggests something more than just logistical oversight. That suggests a deliberate choice to keep him uninformed. According to testimony in the custody hearing, when Thomas finally did learn about Anna's death from Chantel's phone call, he was devastated. He immediately had questions. He wanted to know what happened. He wanted to know how this could have occurred. He wanted to speak with investigators, but by that point, 32 hours had passed. The initial interviews had been conducted. The crime scene had been processed. The medical examiner had completed the autopsy. The initial phase of the investigation was largely complete. Thomas was coming into the situation long after the critical first hours, receiving information secondhand, unable to participate in those early moments when questions are asked and answers are fresh. Thomas's attorney has argued that this delay had another consequence. It prevented Thomas from being able to make decisions about his other children's safety immediately. When Anna died on that cruise ship, Thomas's two younger children were also on that ship. They were present when their sister died. They were being cared for by Chantel and Christopher. And according to Thomas's testimony, he wasn't notified for 32 hours that his children were in a situation where a homicide had occurred, where one of the children in the family had been killed, where his other children might be traumatized or at risk. Think about that from a parent's perspective. Your children are on a cruise with your ex-spouse. Something terrible happens. One of the children dies under circumstances that the FBI is investigating as a homicide. The suspect is another child who was on that cruise. Your other children witnessed or were aware of this tragedy. They're traumatized. They need support. They need safety. And you don't know any of this is happening for 32 hours. By the time you're notified, all the decisions have been made. The children have been questioned. They've been told what happened. They've been given whatever explanation the adults present chose to give them. And you had no say in any of it. Thomas's attorney argued in court that this is precisely why the notification delay matters. It's not just about Thomas's right to know about Anna. It's about his right to protect and make decisions for his other children who were in that situation. Children who, according to the custody agreement, he has legal rights to parent. Children who needed their father during a traumatic event and didn't even know he hadn't been told. Now let's consider the investigative implications of this delay. FBI agents are trained to interview witnesses separately and as quickly as possible after an incident. They want to prevent witnesses from discussing the case with each other before giving statements. They want fresh memories, uncontaminated by others' accounts. When investigating a death, especially a suspicious death, they want to establish who knew what, when they knew it, and how the information flowed between people. In this case, the people who were interviewed first were those present on the cruise: Chantel, Christopher, the stepbrother, and possibly the younger children. They were all together on that ship. They had all been together for days before Anna's death. They had time after Anna was found to discuss what happened, to comfort each other, to process the tragedy together. And in doing so, even innocently, they had time for their memories and accounts to influence each other. That's not an accusation of wrongdoing. It's simple human psychology. When people experience trauma together, they talk about it. They share what they saw, what they heard, what they think happened. And those discussions can inadvertently shape how each person remembers and describes the event. Thomas, excluded from those initial hours, couldn't provide an independent perspective. He couldn't tell investigators about prior concerns he might have had. He couldn't offer context about family dynamics that might have been relevant. He couldn't ask the questions a parent asks when trying to understand how their child died, and by the time he was brought into the situation, the initial narrative had already been established. According to legal experts who have commented on similar cases, notification delays can create problems in both criminal and civil proceedings. In criminal cases, Defense attorneys can argue that late notification of certain witnesses prevented full investigation of alternative theories. In civil cases, delays can be used as evidence of negligence or intentional exclusion. In custody cases, delays can demonstrate a pattern of one parent excluding the other from important decisions and information. In this case, Thomas's legal team used the 32-hour delay as evidence in their argument that Chantel had been systematically alienating the children and excluding Thomas from their lives. The judge in the custody hearing heard testimony about the notification delay. The judge heard Thomas describe learning about his daughter's death from a phone call 32 hours after she was found. The judge heard arguments about whether this delay was innocent oversight or calculated exclusion. And while we don't yet know the judge's full ruling on custody matters, the fact that this delay was considered significant enough to be presented as evidence tells us something about how serious it is. There's one more aspect of this delay that deserves examination. In the immediate hours after a death, especially a death being investigated as a homicide, family members are often in shock. They're traumatized. They're not thinking clearly. They're grieving and trying to process something incomprehensible. In that state, they rely on others, often law enforcement or victim advocates, to guide them through next steps, to tell them what needs to happen, to help them make decisions they're not prepared to make. Thomas was denied that immediate support. He wasn't there when investigators were explaining what happened. He wasn't there when decisions were being made about Anna's remains. He wasn't there when his other children were being told about their sister's death. He wasn't there to hold them, to comfort them, to be the father they needed in that moment. And by the time he knew what had happened, by the time he could try to be present for his children, 32 hours of grief and trauma and decision-making had already occurred without him. According to testimony in the custody hearing, when Thomas finally learned what happened, his immediate instinct was to go to his children. He wanted to see them. He wanted to hold them. He wanted to make sure they were safe and cared for. But by that point, they were back in Hampton, Virginia. The cruise was over. The FBI had released the family. Chantel and Christopher had taken the children home, and Thomas was hours away, just learning about a tragedy that had happened more than a day earlier. Thomas's attorney argued that this delay gave Chantel and Christopher 32 hours to establish with the children what the story would be, 32 hours to frame what happened, 32 hours to explain why Anna died without Thomas being there to provide his own perspective or ask his own questions. Again, this isn't necessarily accusatory of wrongdoing. Parents in trauma do try to explain difficult things to children. They try to provide comfort and structure and answers. But when one parent is completely excluded from that process, when children are told one version of events without their other parent present, it creates a dynamic where truth can become whatever the present adults choose to make it. We need to acknowledge what we don't know. We don't have access to FBI logs or communications. We don't know exactly who the FBI tried to contact and when. We don't know what Chantel or Christopher told investigators about Thomas. We don't know if there were attempts to reach Thomas that failed. We don't know if there was confusion about his role in Anna's life. We don't know if the 32-hour delay was intentional exclusion or tragic oversight. What we do know is what Thomas testified to under oath, that he wasn't notified for 32 hours, that the notification came from Chantel, not law enforcement, that he was excluded from the crucial first day of the investigation and from being present for his children in their time of need. The FBI has not publicly commented on notification procedures in this case. The Bureau typically doesn't discuss ongoing investigations or internal protocols. Carnival Cruise Line has not publicly addressed questions about their notification procedures or their cooperation with law enforcement. So we're left with Thomas's testimony, with standard protocols in similar cases, and with questions about what happened during those 32 hours. Here's why this matters beyond just this one family. Every year, people die on cruise ships under various circumstances. Some are natural deaths, some are accidents, some are suspicious. In each case, next of kin must be notified. In cases involving potential crimes, multiple family members may have rights to information. The procedures for making those notifications matter. They matter for justice. They matter for families. They matter for ensuring that investigations are thorough and fair. If one family member can control who gets notified and when, if they can exclude other parents or guardians from critical information, if they can establish the narrative before others even know something happened, that creates opportunities for truth to be obscured. In the Anna Kepner case, We may never know exactly why Thomas wasn't notified for 32 hours. We may never know if it was oversight or intention, but we can examine what that delay meant. It meant Thomas couldn't advocate for his daughter in those first hours. It meant he couldn't ask questions about supervision and safety. It meant he couldn't be present for his other children when they needed him most. It meant the story of what happened was established by those who were there, without input from someone who knew Anna and loved her and had a right to be part of understanding how she died. Thomas's attorney argued in court that this delay is why custody arrangements need to change. That if Chantel would exclude Thomas even from notification of his daughter's death, even in the midst of a tragedy that affected his whole family, then she cannot be trusted to share information or include him in decisions about his remaining children. The judge will have to weigh that argument against everything else presented in the custody hearing. But the 32-hour delay stands as a stark example of what can happen when one parent has control over information and chooses not to share it. As this case continues, as the FBI investigation proceeds, as custody matters are resolved, the question of those 32 hours will remain. Not because it changes what happened to Anna in that cabin, not because it affects the criminal investigation into who is responsible for her death, but because it reveals something about the family dynamics that existed before Anna died. Dynamics where information was controlled, where access was restricted, where one parent could make decisions without the other being informed. Dynamics that, according to Thomas's testimony, put his children in situations he wasn't aware of and couldn't protect them from. Anna Kepner was 18 years old. She was a student at Temple Christian School. She had friends, family, people who loved her. She had a biological father, Christopher, and a stepfather, Thomas, who had been part of her life for 15 years. When she died on that cruise ship, when the FBI ruled her death a homicide, when her family's tragedy became a federal investigation, Thomas had a right to know. He had a right to be notified promptly. He had a right to be present for his children and to participate in understanding what happened to Anna. The 32-hour delay denied him all of that. Whether that denial was intentional or accidental, malicious or merely chaotic, it had consequences. It meant Thomas received secondhand information. It meant he couldn't ask first-hand questions. It meant his children processed this tragedy without him. And it meant that in the crucial first hours of the investigation, when timelines were being established and narratives were being formed, Thomas's voice was absent. If this case makes you think about the rights of parents in crisis situations, about the importance of transparent communication even during tragedy, about how information control can affect justice and family dynamics, then subscribe to Forbidden Visions and turn on notifications, because we examine cases where the full story takes time to emerge, where details that seem small, like a 32-hour notification delay, reveal larger patterns about families, investigations, and justice. The Anna Kepner case continues to unfold. The FBI investigation is ongoing. The custody battle continues in court, and the questions raised by those 32 hours of silence remain unanswered. This case is a reminder that justice isn't just about determining who committed a crime. It's about ensuring that everyone who has a right to know is informed, that everyone who needs to be heard gets to speak, that families aren't torn further apart by those who control information and decide who deserves to know the truth. Anna Kepner deserved better than what happened to her on that cruise ship, and her father deserved better than learning about her death 32 hours late, through a phone call from someone who had excluded him for months, denied the crucial hours when a parent most needs to be present. Rest in peace, Anna Kepner. Your story deserves to be told completely, including the parts that raise uncomfortable questions about the adults who should have protected you and the delays that kept those who loved you from knowing you were gone.